Everybody comfortable as can be? Well, good morning, one and all. My name is Simon Bloom. Welcome to Bloom Parham, my law firm. I am joined by our clients, David Duley and Catherine Drolette, that are both individual clients and form the company Be Our Guest, which was to be a tenant at the Piedmont Park Community Center. We are here in large part due to what the CEO of the Park Conservancy himself referred to as a life safety emergency. And in the dawn of the Music Midtown Festival, which is to start this weekend, we developed a motion to take to Judge McAfee in the Fulton Superior Court. Yes, the same judge that's handling the Trump indictment case, the Trump cases, to ask the judge to stop further use of the Piedmont Park Community Center building until a proper test or testing has been done at the location where a massive sinkhole formed back in 2018. It has been revealed through discovery during the litigation between Be Our Guest as prospective tenants and Piedmont Park Conservancy as the landlord that the sinkhole that you have heard of and seen and have a picture of here was never repaired, the cause for which was never identified, and as a result, the public has no way of knowing with any level of certainty that that building is safe. And so on the eve of thousands of people making their way through Piedmont Park, and in particular to this building at the park, emergency measures must be taken by the court to ensure the safety of the public using that building. And so that's the opening remarks. Let me back up and give some history and try and fill in some context. And it is particularly apropos as we sit probably 2 miles from the park, 1 mile or less from the most recent sinkhole you all may be familiar with. I call it the Merrimack's sinkhole only because it was across the street from Merrimack's, where you saw a white SUV drive into it. Thankfully, nobody was seriously hurt. You can look around the country for examples of sinkholes where people were very seriously hurt. And so in the face of evidence that this sinkhole was discovered, yet no cause was ever ascertained or arrived at, and no sufficient or adequate repair was ever done, it alarms and should alarm anyone listening. And applause to my clients for, frankly, making this more about protecting the public than about a landlord-tenant dispute over whether and how they built out their restaurants. The story starts in, before I get to the story, basics on a sinkhole. A sinkhole, as you can imagine, is a big hole in the ground, in its simplest term. Sinkholes are formed underneath the grade, underneath the floor, underneath the street, underneath the slab. They can't be seen until it's too late. So for example, when this void formed underneath a double concrete slab floor in the community center building, you couldn't see it. There was no warning of it necessarily. And so what likely happens is water is flowing underneath the ground. And water flows and seeks its lowest point. As water flows, it pulls with it dirt. And if it's going downhill, it pulls the dirt on the hill down. And as a result, it makes a bigger and bigger and bigger hole. Well, you've got a structure above that hole that's being formed that holds itself together and is usually supported by columns. Well, if it's not sufficiently supported by columns and the dirt that was underneath it is all washed away, in comes and breaks the floor, the street, the building, the columns, whatever. We're relying upon the stability of the soil to hold up the structure. That's your lesson 101 on sinkholes. They happen in yards, they happen under streets, they happen under buildings, and this one happened under a community center building that has housed restaurants, a kids camp, the will call for Music Midtown, and other publicly used facilities for years. We are in 2023. That was 2018 when the sinkhole formed in this building. So these good folks were trying to, they own and operate the Nook, which many of you are probably familiar with, which is literally a stone's throw away from where Willie's and Shake Shack exist today, to give you some sense of where we're talking. The Piedmont Park Community Center building currently houses Shake Shack, Willie's, and the Piedmont Park Conservancy offices. For Music Midtown, it also houses Will Call. So think about going to pick up your tickets. Do people pick up tickets anymore, or is it all on your phone? I don't know. But think about going to pick up your tickets at the will call line and literally be walking over the location of where this massive sinkhole was formed and revealed. So they enter into a lease with Piedmont Park Conservancy to rent out space at the community center building to develop two restaurant concepts. They're in the process of building out that space like all restaurants do, and as they go to install the utilities under the slab floor, they've got to cut some of the concrete, and once that happens, that slab floor falls in on itself. So think about the strength, and you can see here, that is the slab floor that fell into this massive hole. Once you cut through that floor to make room for the utilities, all the pressure holding the floor up is released. And that's why the floor fell in on itself and into the hole. And you can see just how thick this slab floor was. It was actually a double slab. Why was it a double slab, do you ask? Well, one might very easily conclude that it was a double slab because somebody knew when they were putting that slab in that there was problems underneath the slab, because it is not standard. Why is it not standard? Because it costs more money to install a double slab as opposed to a single slab. And so the cover-up begins. We discover in 2018 this massive hole underneath one of the restaurant spaces in the community center building. We sound the alarm, we scream, we send up smoke flares, and we tell the landlord we have a major problem here at the space. And we simply can't go further to work and build out the space unless and until this gets diagnosed and cured. And once it's been diagnosed and cured, then we can get back in and continue to build out, occupy the space, and move on down the road. So this is bucket one of this whole case. Bucket one is the commercial dispute between my clients, the Be Our Guest folks, and the Piedmont Park Conservancy because they couldn't deliver a space that we could build out and have a restaurant on. That's the pending litigation in Fulton Superior Court before Judge McAfee. That is what we'll call the commercial dispute. We have litigated that for years now in an effort to essentially recover all of the losses and the injury and the damages that they have incurred as a result of the Park Conservancy not being able to deliver a space on which you could build a restaurant. It's very simple. But the second bucket, and the reason that we're here today, is that during that process of identifying this problem and saying, Conservancy, there's a major problem here that needs to be investigated, right? Diagnose the patient and provide a cure, and then ensure that that patient is cured. I think about it with those three prongs. Well, the Conservancy didn't do any of them. The Conservancy didn't do any of them. They had a structural engineer, not a geotechnical engineer, go in and look around. He concedes, he just went in and looked around, didn't do any testing of the soil, didn't get into the hole, right? Think about it, there's this gaping hole. It looks much, much bigger when you remove the slab out of it. They didn't get into the hole, they didn't do any soil testing, they didn't do any testing around the hole, they didn't do any assessment of the footers, which are the columns that hold up the building. They did none of that. And this was all in the September of 2018 timeframe. Yet the structural engineer goes in and says, well, I mean, the building's still standing, so I guess everything's fine. I'm paraphrasing, but not by much. And therefore, the Conservancy tells the tenant, you need to go back in and finish. We've delivered you a structurally sound building, and there's no reason for you to stop work. Well, how many of you would like your sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers working at a construction site where they haven't diagnosed the problem, there's a gaping hole in the floor, and there's no plan nor set of plans to remediate? So the work obviously stopped. This became the most alarming to us after we finished the process of discovery in this case and revealed that the Conservancy has known about this problem since the fall, or at least summer of 2018. Has never diagnosed the cause, has never fixed it or repaired it, and has never confirmed that the repairs were sufficient and that this is in fact a safe place to go. That is what brings us as the impetus to filing the motion that we filed this morning with Judge McAfee. And that motion points out that those three things still haven't happened, that this site is not safe, that no professional engineer has ever concluded that it is safe. And as a result, tens of thousands of people should not be traipsing through, around, and in that building. And that is the essence. And so with that backdrop, I'd like to turn the microphones and the podium over to David Duley with Be Our Guest to explain a little bit more about some of the history, the background. I will be happy to take questions after David's done, so keep them in mind unless you have them right now that are just burning that you need answered. The relief requested in our motion is very simple and is frankly very easy. We're not asking for anything beyond the three things that I have talked about. We simply want a qualified geotechnical engineer to conduct the appropriate testing, to diagnose the patient, to evaluate what the cause of the sinkhole was and is. Number two, identify what repairs are necessary and if necessary. And number three is what the repairs are. Diagnose whether repairs are necessary and what those repairs are. And monitor to make sure that those repairs are actually completed. Does this bring into danger or threaten the viability of Music Midtown? I leave that for wiser minds to conclude. But I certainly would not, if I were in charge, allow folks to access a property where there is a known void which has more likely than not been continuing to expand since 2018. Ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'll leave my stuff here.
Thank you, Simon. As Simon mentioned, I'm David Duley. I live here in Atlanta. I've been a longtime resident and entrepreneur and business partner to Catherine at the Nook on Piedmont Park, in which we started in March of 2009. We're very fortunate to have the community embrace us at the Nook. We've had a lot of success. We've built a lot of great relationships. And for years, we were excited to expand that feel, that community, into a new restaurant. Expand the Nook concept into other spaces nearby so we could, again, serve the community in ways in which they wanted. We invested time, treasure, resources to build out and try to attempt to build something really special for the residents and the community to enjoy in Midtown. As Simon indicated, we ran into this. And what happened was, under normal circumstances, every common sense person would say, what caused this? We want to get to the bottom of this. And what has been shocking, adding new restaurants was a dream of mine and Catherine, but the past 5 years has turned into really a nightmare. And it's a nightmare that has confounded me to this day, because what had happened since then, and I'll get into the specifics, is that the Piedmont Park Conservancy, led by Mark Banta and enabled by the board, has led a campaign of deception about what has happened in this space. There are many examples. This hole was never diagnosed on what caused this sinkhole. We hired our own geotechnical experts who opined that there could be other holes located throughout this facility. Without the proper testing, it's hard to know. Early on, we offered to help remedy this sinkhole with our own contracting staff. However, we were denied that ability by Mark Banta, the CEO of Piedmont Park Conservancy, who indicated that this was a life safety emergency and that its effects could be throughout the building, not just the space we lease. So they were going to take it over, find the cause, and repair it. Unfortunately, that's when things got really squirrely. They kind of went radio silent. Under the cloak of night, this hole was filled in. Our engineers, our lenders, our contractors, all professional, top-notch companies here in Atlanta, were asked, can we see the engineering report? What caused the sinkhole? How can we get back to work? Those engineering reports were never found because they've never been created. Insurance companies wouldn't underwrite the job site. Banks wouldn't lend money to the job site. And so here we are stuck with millions of dollars into this project, told, get back to work. And so we couldn't believe what happened. We reached out for help. Reports were not given to us that we later discovered during deposition and discovery over the past 5 years. And as Simon indicated, our worst fears came true. Our worst fears were that this is truly a cover-up. It was covered up without being diagnosed. And it was a conscious, coordinated cover-up. We have evidence through discovery and deposition that the CEO, Mark Banta, attempted to change the narrative of the report from the city of Atlanta, who inspected sewer assets under the building to see if that's what may have caused it. The city of Atlanta said it was not our assets. This is private property. Piedmont Park Conservancy, you're responsible in finding out what caused this. They did not like that answer, so through back channels, it was attempted to change that report. The city of Atlanta did not comply. They did the upright thing. Later, the Piedmont Park Conservancy issued a press release in which they indicated that this was a commercial dispute among tenants and that the city of Atlanta had discovered and fixed the sinkhole. Later on, the City of Atlanta Legal Department had to intervene and have that press release retracted by the Piedmont Park Conservancy, in which they stated. So this has been an ongoing campaign of deception to, I believe, almost all stakeholders. And unfortunately, I've been lucky enough to sit on many boards, both corporate and nonprofit, and the job of the board is to be a fiduciary, to look out for the stewardship, be a wise fiduciary in the assets that the organizations have, and to make sure that the right thing is done with transparency. It's a sobering day because I can say that that did not happen, full stop. And it's a sobering day because Warren Buffett talks about, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin one. And I love Piedmont Park. Kat loves Piedmont Park. We own a restaurant across the street from Piedmont Park. That's why this has been so damaging, confusing to us over the past 5 years on why did this cover-up continue? Why hasn't any board member asked what caused this sinkhole? What has been done to remedy it? We are at our wits' end. We have tried everything to bring around what is happening with this space. Their defense, as Simon mentioned, is that the building hasn't fallen in yet. So therefore, what they did might work. Well, gruesome, but people slept fine at the Surfside condo on June 23rd. 2021. June 24th, massive tragedy, almost 200 people died. These things happen quickly. And what's even more alarming is this was yesterday in that space, over the covered area, in the Willie's part of the building. This structural crack is over and near the proximity of the sinkhole. You guys can go there today. Walk the floor and see where the preponderance of cracks are. The preponderance of cracks are around the area where the sinkhole was discovered. This gives you an idea of the entrance, to give you kind of an orientation of where the sinkhole was, which is sort of to the right of those booths, where those cracks are. The reason we are so concerned in talking to you today and filing this motion is this is the X marks the spot where the sinkhole is. This is where the Will Call Center for Piedmont, for the Music Midtown concert this weekend is going to be. This is where thousands of people will traverse, let alone the children's camps that have participated in this area. This is a map of exactly where the building is. This is the community center in question. This is where the sinkhole is. And then this is the Music Midtown map indicating its use as a ticket center for the upcoming concert. And so we all know that Piedmont Park has had some issues with safety lately. And we hate that. We have employees that walk through the park and weird things happen to them. And the park is always in fundraising mode. The park has wonderful donors that care deeply about Piedmont Park as a piece of land that is a jewel in the city of Atlanta. But unfortunately, we find ourselves that that piece of land is not being stewarded correctly. The assets entrusted to these organizations have been used to fight us during this cover-up than to do the right thing and simply find the cause of the sinkhole. Last year alone, because this is a publicly disclosed entity, you can research the 990 of the Piedmont Park Conservancy. They spent twice as much money in legal fees fighting us than security in Piedmont Park. Just a few months ago, there was another assault in which cameras weren't working. So here we are, we have some of the greatest companies in Atlanta who pride themselves on safety, community, transparency, giving money to an organization that has redirected their dollars for a cover-up. cover-up that is showing signs of cracking today. And so what are you supposed to do if you're us? We have all this information. We have nothing to hide. This is all available. What are we supposed to do? And so when we found out that will call's now in the building, thousands of people are going to be there. We can't do, we can't just sit around and not talk about this. This is safety. We live in the community. We have business in the community. We care about the people in the community. And I really wish Piedmont Park Conservancy and its board had the same passion, because we don't see it.
Okay, thanks, David. A couple of additional points, and anything, again, questions I'm happy to entertain. David, Kat are happy to entertain. But a couple of things for your all's consideration as well. What we know definitively from the record and from the documents that have been produced is that a non-geotechnical engineer, a structural engineer, there's a big difference. A structural engineer deals with everything from the flooring up, and a geotechnical engineer deals with everything from below the flooring down into the dirt. They had a non-geotechnical engineer assess both the hole, and I told you about that a little bit, and then came back again after the hole was mysteriously filled with grout. There was no evaluation around the grout that was put into the hole. There was no testing outside of the grout that was put into the hole. There was just grout put into the hole. And we, as we stand here today, don't know who did it, why, or how they did it. Which is why there's this discussion about a cover-up. There's no question that the grout was put in the hole. We just don't know, nor does the Conservancy, nor does the city for that matter, what caused the hole to form in the first place. So if you don't know what caused the hole to form in the first place, you certainly can't know that the grout being put in the hole was sufficient to repair the problem. So that's point number one. The same structural engineer came back to the site after the grout was put in the hole, and even though he had identified in the beginning, if I were to fix this hole, this is what I would recommend you do. Here's the remediation plan. It's in writing. We have it. It's in a report that he did in and around September of 2018 that says, here are the things you should do. What was number one? Hire a geotechnical engineer. That was the first recommendation. Then he goes about talking about the different things we think you ought to do to fix it. He concedes when he came back to the site after the grout was filled in that the grout filling effort did not comply with his recommendations. He says that in his November report. He thinks that the grout filling was adequate, and he is the one that Banta relies upon to say in their website notice in January of 2019, headline, Community Center is structurally sound. This is their headline notice in January of 2019. Community Center is structurally sound, AKA you people don't have anything to worry about. And he says in that January 10, 2019 notice on their website, this community center was. Does that look structurally sound to you? The community center was and is structurally sound according to two separate reports from the community center's engineer of record. The engineer of record is the guy that says the first thing you need to do is hire a geotechnical engineer in order to remediate this problem. He says that the void under the slab has been repaired and that there are no other significant signs of erosion under slab voids other than what has already been repaired. The engineer of record, the same guy that said you need to get a geotechnical engineer, is confident that the structure is sound and well-founded. And so this is what the Conservancy is going to tell you when you ask them the hard questions that we've posed. That is the script they're going to read from. We had the engineer of record stamp a report that says that the facility is structurally sound. You make your own determinations about whether that holds water. Because here is the engineer of record who testified for 6 hours that he didn't test the soils, and the right thing to do would be to test the soils, and that he's not a soil engineer or a geotechnical engineer, and that you need to hire a geotechnical engineer, and that I don't know what the cause of the sinkhole is, and I don't know if it was sufficiently repaired because I don't know what the cause is. And confirms that the city of Atlanta concluded that there was no defect, deficiency, or failure in the sewer pipes below the property. And so when this notice goes out that the community center is structurally sound, the city of Atlanta wakes up and says, whoa, 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 whoa. You guys are talking about the city doing a repair and concluding that the repair was sufficient and that the facility is now sound. We didn't say those things. And so you have an email of April 18th, 2019 from Keisha Powell to Mark Banta, the CEO. And to remember or to point out, refresh your recollection, Keisha Powell at the time, professional engineer, was the commissioner of the Department of Watershed Management in the city of Atlanta. And she says to Banta, I'm writing to advise you to revise your notice to clearly distinguish between your work to address the void, i.e. nothing, there was no work done by the Conservancy, and our investigation of the utilities by our team. Again, all we did, city speaking, all we did was go to make sure that the sewer was not defective, failed, or have any leaks, basically. She says, our engineers did not provide a review of the void under the slab. As was communicated previously, this is private property and not under our purview to investigate the building slab further or repair the void. Well, Banta wants to send out the all's clear notice and to rely upon things that he says that the city did and said, and the city says, you can't say that, very clearly. And so in the end, you've got the city council now getting involved in April of 2019. The city council dealing with both the commissioner and Banta at the Conservancy, and when Councilwoman Ide inquires of the commissioner about this statement, the all clear statement, the commissioner writes back, make sure your microphones are working. Good morning, Councilmember Ide. I was finally able to review the documents attached to this email, which I will forward to the Department of Law. I believe the statement provided by the Conservancy is inaccurate, period. We did not provide an engineer's report. We performed an inspection of our utilities, and the linear infrastructure team, which is the inspectors that went out there, deemed the utilities to be sound. I will forward the documents to the DOL, Department of Law, so they can opine on how to address the Conservancy's notice. Again, the all clear notice. That's what David was talking about a minute ago. So I point these things out because people say and do things that cause us to scratch our head. And having tried a few cases in my career, the one thing that never lies are the emails that you wrote at the time. You can try to wiggle and you can try to explain and you can try to rationalize, but what you cannot escape is what you put in writing at the time the things were happening. And what we know is that the Conservancy was on notice of this hole. The Conservancy was on notice that the city did not find its sewer system to be at fault, and nobody else ever ascertained the cause of the hole. Those are the facts, plain and simple. And so the Conservancy can certainly roll the dice and continue to conduct operations out of that building and continue to allow its tenants to invite people to come eat and to continue to allow the music festival to come and pick up their tickets. That is the Conservancy's choice until a judge says otherwise. And that is what we intend to do. We are going to ask the judge to stop any further operations on that site until we know what the diagnosis is, what the cure is, and to ensure that the cure has been executed effectively. Those are my comments. I'm happy to entertain questions, I'm sure. Yes, ma'am.
So have you filed the order yet, or you're planning to?
We filed it this morning.
So this morning? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So the conservatory filled this hole, and they had several documents showing that it's been filled, and how much of this is a disgruntled, client who couldn't get in on the property and now is forming this lawsuit and this complaint, scaring people about the, Music Midtown that's coming up this weekend? How much of the, I mean, when people look at this, they're gonna say, just like you said, the conservatory's gonna tell you this, they're gonna blah, 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 and from their point of view, it looks like everything has been taken care of. And you can go into any restaurant and see a crack on the floor, right? And so how much of this is he's upset because he couldn't get into that property and open up this restaurant?
It's a very fair question. It's a very reasonable question. So let me try and take it in a few pieces. First and foremost, the biggest difference between a crack in the floor and this scenario is that we have a history of a massive hole forming underneath the floor. That's the first major difference. Yes, buildings settle, cracks form, some are surface and superficial, some are evidence of actual problems beneath. Their own quote-unquote expert says, I don't know if the hole came quickly or if it took decades to form. I don't know, nor could he. So that's the first piece. Second piece, I should say, Mrs. Duley and Mr. Ouellette were in the process of building out this space for their restaurants, had a signed lease, were ready to open up or get to where they could open up when this happened. Because the Conservancy was never able to diagnose the problem or repair the problem sufficiently, they couldn't get a lender to continue to lend. They had sufficient money to finish the project, but nobody would go work there. Nobody with any sense would go work there. So the reason that they could not continue and finish the project and open was because the Conservancy took back control of the construction and the repair or no repair, and then terminated the lease on the restaurant owners. So those are the facts on that. As for the key to your question, Simon, why shouldn't we just think these are disgruntled litigants in a case about a lease? I've known this woman for over 20 years, and I've known this man and seen what is important to him for years. And this is not about the money. This is not about the money. The money will be resolved in the litigation. We'll go to trial. We'll deal with that. This is completely separate. This is about being the neighbors of this park for decades, supporting the park, and I think genuinely in their hearts, they don't want to see anybody get hurt. And think about what you would do if you were armed with this information, knowing that there's a problem that has not been diagnosed, and a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, something catastrophic happens there again. And then you'll all be in this room again saying, why didn't your clients do anything?
What will happen to the current tenants in that building, Willie's and Shake Shack, if this motion's granted?
Well, it will depend on the extent of the relief the judge gives. If the judge says nobody sets foot in that building until this is figured out, then they will not be able to do business, at least well, I wouldn't guess that nobody means nobody. Cooks, guests, nobody. If he stops short of that, which is to allow people to access parts of the building but not other parts, that it gets chopped up in the mix. But what we hope he will do is to say, Conservancy, figure this out now. Figure out the cause, figure out whether the grout was sufficient, and figure out what needs to be done to make sure it is 100% safe.
So I want to make sure, the space that you all are planning to move in, is it within where Willie's and Shake Shack, is that?
Go back to the
Yeah.
diagram.
Oh, yep, sure. We were going to occupy 2 restaurant spots.
Okay.
We were right here where Shake Shack currently resides, was gonna be one of our concepts called Walkers.
Okay.
And then over here, where the sinkhole is, was a concept, a takeout concept called Soulshine.
But her question is, this is where Willie's is now.
This is where Willie's is now. So this is in Willie's, this area right now.
Willie's chicken concept is what you saw, the picture of the crack in the floor.
Correct.
That's right above where the sinkhole was purportedly filled with grout. Yes, ma'am?
Why not bring this issue up sooner than the weekend before Music Midtown, the safety of this building?
It took some time to arrive definitively, well, two things. It took some time to arrive definitively at the conclusion that they don't know and have no idea what caused this sinkhole, and the repair or alleged repair that they tried to do simply wasn't sufficient. It took some time. We also had a hearing about this expert where we learned some things, the expert that they rely upon, their engineer of record, which led me to conclude that he has, with respect, no idea what caused this sinkhole and whether the grout filling was sufficient to make this property safe. And so, I'll let David elaborate. And so as a result of those two things, plus, frankly, being able to get the court's attention with a motion takes some time. You want to expound on that, or is that sufficient?
Yeah, what you'll also see is that Music Midtown, through Live Nation, did not release the map of the area on what buildings would serve which purposes until about 10 days ago. And so that was also very alarming to us. And so you'll be able to see when they actually released their high-res map, this thing right here was just released recently.
There it is, yeah.
Yeah. And so that was also additionally shocking to us, that they continue to use that building.
And then quick clarification question on the images of the sinkholes that you all have been showing. What dates were those taken?
It would have had to have been in
August and
September
September
of 18.
Okay, so that includes the slab that's falling in and then also the one where we see the cylinder in the middle?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you send over digital copies of those? I haven't received them.
Yep.
Yeah, Mike?
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
When, isn't there a trial date set for this
It's in flux.
in October?
The first case, what I call the first case, but the commercial landlord-tenant dispute in and of itself is in flux. We're discussing it as recently as yesterday, whether the trial will take place the first week of October. The second piece, which is the emergent piece, can be set for hearing any minute now. We will ask the court as soon as we adjourn here for a hearing.
How long does a geotechnical review take? Is it hours or days or weeks?
The more you pay, the faster they work. And so they can be out there tomorrow, they can be taking boring samples, they can be taking core samples. So boring samples in the soil to determine if there's water in the soil, to determine how compacted the soil is. They can be taking core samples of the floor to determine whether in fact there's water in the floor, whether there's gaps below the floor. Just think about a straw that goes down into the floor, and as long as there's something solid to resist, it just keeps going. But when there's a void, you feel the void. To answer your question directly, it really depends on how quickly and how much is paid to get them to do the work. But it could start tomorrow.
Is it possible to have those results before Music Midtown or before this October trial date?
Yes, sure. Yeah. If they get out there and do the right thing and look, if they go out there and they get a objective geotechnical engineer with a reputable crew that goes out there and does this testing and come back and say to the court, Judge, everything's fine, we'll all breathe a sigh of relief and everybody can get back to what they're doing. But until that happens, it's, in my opinion, irresponsible to allow it to continue.
Did Willie's know that this was there, or is that out of your purview? I mean, when they opened and built their,
I don't know what Willie's knew.
okay.
I do know that this was not, in the fall of 2018, this was not a secret. I mean, they were
Right.
screaming it
Yeah.
at the rooftops, so.
I saw the, yeah, okay.
We were told to not tell anyone by the Piedmont Park Conservancy.
And when
The
did
Conservancy told you not to disclose to the rest of the world that there was a sinkhole problem.
Correct.
But there was stories. We
Right,
were-
right, right, right.
Yeah, when did they terminate your lease?
It was in 2019,
year 2018? Because you guys couldn't keep building because
Well,
safety issues.
So, yeah, you know, there was a rumor that they propagated that we ran out of money, we were looking for a way to get out of the lease. That is 1,000% not the case. In fact, they backed off those claims, but that was the lie being told to the board and other people to say these people just want out. We already have over, you know, $1 million into it. Our bank is on record through also deposition saying that we're fully funded. The J.M. Williams, our contractors, insurance company is on the record saying they won't allow them to continue on the job site because of the not knowing what's going on with the soil underneath. Our insurance company wouldn't underwrite this process. All of our geotechnical engineers that we hired wouldn't touch this space. And under deposition, they won't even let their children go in the building. And so all we've asked the entire time is to do the right thing. And it has been outstandingly perplexing on why this cover-up has happened. Simon mentioned a little bit earlier that this building has a history of potential settling issues, which led to the double slab being installed. You can see two distinct slabs here, which is exceptionally rare.
What was there before you all?
Storage. And so there are things about this area that we are unclear about, right? That we don't know, that were discovered during this process. And it is our fear that maybe there's some institutional knowledge about what lies underneath that is a very inconvenient truth. Because why would the Conservancy spend up roughly $500,000 in legal fees to fight us rather than make the park safer? That's where we're at today. So donors, you want to know where your money's going? It's going to this. You want to know why cameras aren't working or things aren't being kept up? It's because of this. And unfortunately, through our deposition with other board members, I fear that the Piedmont Park Conservancy Board is a ceremonial board, not an activist board, that has outsourced its responsibility of operations to the few operators, Mark Banta and his crew that work in operations. During depositions, we have board members that have no idea what their role is as board members at Piedmont Park Conservancy. And so, look,
We play that line.
yeah. And so we've been invited, you know, we used to be big donors to the Piedmont Park Conservancy because we own the Nook, literally across the street, and we take a piece of our profits and donate every year, and we got invited to the fancy parties. Unfortunately, the tough work of being on the board and addressing tough issues seems to have been disregarded in this case.
Could you just explain the coordinated cover-up, I guess in like a few simple words that you believe that is happening? 'Cause that's pretty strong accusation.
She's the best.
Yeah, I just, let me, sorry, just,
If that's okay.
yeah, I just want to make really clear, the only thing that we needed from the Conservancy was a geotechnical engineer report that stated the site was safe. We got those for ourselves multiple times and provided every report we had in real time to the Conservancy. The Conservancy not only didn't, in 5 years, they have not paid to get a geotechnical engineer report. Why? It's baffling. We had them and they were $700 or $14. Why not just do that? The coordinated cover-up, even when they did give us a structural engineer report, we were hoping we could get back to work. They prevented their structural engineer from talking to us or even talking to our general contractor who had a long relationship with the structural engineer. I don't know why any of this has happened. I surmise it has to do with the fact that the day after the sinkhole happened, the CEO of the Conservancy allowed children to continue playing next to this open hole 6 feet away. The kids' camp was going on. And let it continue. Willie's continued to operate. They were unaware what was happening. And of course, we we did tell them. I don't know. Again, I've been a Piedmont Park Conservancy supporter for 25 years. This is heartbreaking.
Yeah, directly to the question, to try to give you kind of the bullet points. September 2018, the sinkhole emerges. They send a structural engineer in to evaluate. The structural engineer confessedly and admittedly doesn't do the type of testing that needed to be done. He makes some general observations and some general conclusions that included hiring a geotech engineer. So piece one of the cover-up is, why not hire a geotechnical engineer? To ascertain the actual answer and to get to the bottom of the question. Step two is, rather than come up with that answer and information on your own, which would have cost a fraction of what they have now spent and what they are exposed to in the first litigation, they just stuck with this structural engineer who admittedly says, I'm the structural engineer. I do what's from grade up, not from undergrade down. That's, I would say, step number two. When they got some pressure about the safety and stability and structural integrity of the building, that's when the January 2019 notice comes out that says, all clear, everything's fine, that the building is structurally sound. Well, that's step three of the cover-up, because in fact they knew and or should have known that it wasn't, both because their engineer was unqualified to conclude it, and because the city of Atlanta 3 months later says, it's not the sewer that's caused this hole, so take that out of your notice. And they did revise their notice in April to soften those conclusions. So that's step three of the cover-up. And then even after litigation was filed, they rely on the same engineers to say the same exact things. And instead of, again, having an opportunity in 2019 to hire the right person and do the correct testing, for some inexplicable reason, I have a theory, but for some inexplicable reason, they don't. They would rather contribute, or I should say devote their resources to fighting, and to fighting the commercial case, as opposed to getting to the bottom of it. What they did or didn't say to Willie's or to Shake Shack, I have no idea. But that would certainly be a very good question to be asked to them. I assume, and I take with it the risks that come with assuming, that they feared, the Conservancy feared, that this was a much bigger problem than just this hole. Because why else wouldn't you ensure that this hole was fixed, that everybody could say amen around and move on? I assume that they were concerned that there was just something else going on other than the sewer not functioning or failing that caused other, what are called subterranean dynamics to happen. Stuff going on underneath the ground, water flowing underneath the ground in old sewer lines, outside of old sewer lines. I mean, I don't remember which of the news outlets published it, but when the Merrimack's sinkhole was formed, there was a great old map of the city of Atlanta that showed what was going on in the 1910s and teens and 20s that are underneath the road system that we have right now, and that voids are created as a result. I have no idea what's underneath that building, but it's their job to find out.
That's one additional comment. When we get to court, we will produce witnesses that have engaged board members bragging that they will bully us through drowning us in legal fees. So that was also part of their plan.
Anything? Yes, ma'am.
No, I'm sorry.
Everybody good? Okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming.
Is this the motion?
Yes, copy for you.